back, everyone, to the Shockers of a podcast. It is, as always, excellent to have you along with us. I'm joined by Stu.
Hey!
Wow.
Hi, Joel. Hi, everyone.
It's been a few weeks.
I know.
Since you've been on.
It's kind of like I've been missing in action.
I think you've been a bit busy.
I've been busy.
Which is fine. But we were just before we were about to recording, I said, have you been watching Slow Horses?
Yes.
And you said yes. And I've brought this up before. I remember, I think it was way back at the start of this year where I watched the first two seasons.
Yes.
I talked to Ethan about it.
Uh-huh.
I think it could be my favourite TV show from the last 5 years.
I 100% agree.
Yeah. So it's on Apple TV.
Yep.
We should let people know it's about a place in the London called Slough House, which is where the rejects from MI5 go after they stuff up in an operation. And it's run by a guy, an old MI5 guy called Jackson Lamb, and it's played by Gary Oldman, and he's a dirtbag.
He's hilarious.
Yeah, he's hilarious. But great storytelling, I think. But also my favourite part is the way it's shot. I think it's beautifully shot.
It's awesome
really
shot. Yeah.
What's your reaction to it?
Yeah, well, I love all that spy agency stuff.
Me
like
too.
MI5's cool. I love all that. I've got a theory about the show.
Please.
I'm the only person that I know of that thinks this. But I actually think what the idea of Slough House,
Well,
help me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, go.
If you're in MI5
Yep.
and you do something wrong, but it's not bad enough to get rid of you, they put you in Slough House.
Yes.
And then you're kind of like seen as like you can deal with all the lower contending issues because you're not important enough to be part of the main game, right?
Yep.
So they've got these all real professional spies and agents or whatever they are in the big one. What's that called?
Oh, I forget what
It's called something.
they call it. The Park.
The Park.
That's what they call
so
it.
if you're in the Park, like you're a full tilt spy.
Have you seen the MI5, that park, the building?
No.
It's that ugly monstrosity on the Thames.
Oh, that one.
Yeah.
That's actually where
that's James
where it's
Bond's
set.
always at.
Yeah, right. Are they part of James Bond crew?
Yeah, I think
MI5. I thought that was MI6.
Oh, it might be MI, but I think they're in the same building.
Anyway, this is so much stuff that you can go away and research. Go knock yourself out. Find out about MI5, MI6, the building. But anyway, this is my theory.
Yes.
So Slough House is meant for the rejects of MI5. I actually think that's a cover. And I think Slough House is actually running MI5.
Wow.
Yes.
You think like that will come out in later seasons?
I don't know, but that's what I reckon.
Tell you what.
Because each of the episodes, they are the ones who crack the problem. And they're the ones that make the park look like they don't know what they're doing.
And then they solve it at the end.
And nobody expects them to solve it because they think they're the rejects and all the enemies of the state don't even give them any notice. So they go undercover and they're under the radar. So I think they're the undercover version of the MI5. That's my theory.
Are you listening, Slow Horses riders?
If I was a writer, I would write that into the thing. Think about it. Do yourself a favour.
But is it like... I don't know why. I love really good TV, as you know we've said before on this podcast. But this one is just like, I can't get enough.
It's good.
Of it.
I can't stop watching it.
I'm frustrated that it's only coming out every Wednesday at the moment because it's that recent.
It's good. It's like what used to be in the old days.
Yes, it is.
We used to go to school and go, did you watch Magnum last night? I wonder what's going to happen next week.
Well, like Magnum PI.
I love Magnum PI.
Okay.
So here's the other thing I've been doing as well as watching Slow Horses.
Slow Horses is at Slough House.
Yeah, it's confusing.
Yeah.
So I'm also watching the back catalogue of Magnum PI, okay. Battlestar Galactica, 1977.
Wow.
And I'm watching old Doctor Who's from the 1970s, 1980s actually, which is my era. And what I do is I watch one of those a night and then I watch it again the next week. So I'm back in my rhythm I used to be in when I was a kid.
Oh,
so
really?
I'd have to wait a week to find out what happens.
What? Is there a reason you're doing that?
I just thought I'd do it for fun.
I've
only got time to watch one show a day.
I was going to say, you're listing all these shows. I'm like, no wonder you're busy because you're watching them too many.
No, I watch one a day. So they're about half hour also or an hour. And I watch the things like the modern stuff with Lou, but she doesn't want to watch Magnum PI.
Right.
Great show.
Is that Tom Selleck?
I love that show.
Why? Why do you like it? Just looks... Is it in Miami?
It's in Hawaii.
Hawaii.
So good. It's such a good show.
Yep.
He is like a Vietnam vet with a cool moustache. And the whole thing is he's trying to deal with his past and he's trying to solve crimes. And it's just cool. And he's got the coolest car in the history of the world after the VW Combi.
What's he rocking?
He's rocking a Ferrari.
It's a Ferrari.
I don't know the actual. It's 1984, I think.
250. I'd have to check
You'd
that.
know it. But there's a
I know
quintessential scene where he does this little skid and burn out and then drives onto the road after he gives the camera a bit of a wink.
Well, not a GTO. That's not a 250.
I know it's a bit old. It hasn't
old.
aged well. Some of the episodes are a bit clunky, but I actually think it's really interesting. Good fun show.
I'm just trying to look it up. No, I'm not getting the right Ferrari. I need to
In the
research
80s, there was this thing about planes and jets and helicopters. Almost every TV show had them in it. So
really?
part of the fun of it is there's just like heaps of helicopter action and it's actually there's a massive bromance going on between the three friends.
Is it?
Yeah, there's a guy who owns a club, a guy who's a helicopter pilot and Magnum PI. And even he's staying at this rich man's resort house to kind of be security, and the guy who runs the house doesn't like him, but they kind of do like each other. Mm-hmm. So yeah, there's some elements of it that haven't aged well, but it's a good show. It's fun.
I think the Ferrari is a 308 GTS.
Oh, there you go. Isn't it a
Quattro
beautiful car?
Quattro Valvoli.
How much would they be now?
Oh, and that's got to be surely at over 500 grand, maybe.
Oh, they're beautiful
Depends
cars.
on which Ferrari it is.
It's ones with the lights that pop up. You know those ones?
That's very 80s too, isn't
It
it?
is. I love it.
Pop-up lights.
It's pretty 80s.
There's a lot of cars from the 80s.
A lot of that.
Pop-up lights.
Yeah.
I don't like many things from the 80s, but there's lots of cars that I love from the 80s.
Yeah, right. There you go.
My
That's
favourite car, BMW E30 M3.
Okay.
You know, the real boxy
Yep, I do actually.
BMW?
Yeah.
That's one of my favourite cars ever.
Yeah, I
because
like them too.
It's the first car that I was like, that's a car I love
Okay,
when I was a kid.
that's cool.
Yeah.
There you go.
There you go. You said you've been busy.
Yes.
You've been doing many things. One thing, though, is that you took a trip last week to Brewarrina.
Yes.
What was that for? Carol's, wasn't it?
Yes. So I was asked to speak at the Carol service at Brewarrina, and Brewarrina is 12 hours drive northwest. It's almost at the New South Wales Queensland border. It's just shy of Burke, and it's north of Dubbo. So if you've got that in your head. So Brewarrina, we've had a long-term relationship with Brewarrina, with Pastor Isaac and Eileen Gordon, and they've been running a Christian ministry there that's terrific. We've been friends with them for 25 years, or maybe not 25, maybe 20 years. And yeah, we had a really good weekend. And what's really exciting is I've got some stuff I can share about some of the new ministry ideas they've got there and what they're doing out west, which is really good.
Oh, well, first of all, the carols were fun, though. It was hot. Though,
It was heaps hot. It was nearly 50 degrees.
Yeah.
Well,
it was like 42 here in Sydney, around that.
Yeah, right.
So it would have been even hotter out there, right?
Bit hotter, yeah. So just by 4 degrees, something like that.
That's still... I feel like anytime you're over 40, like 1 degrees is going to make a real difference in how hot it is.
It's a good point, yeah. Anyway, so they did the carols at the race course, and they killed 8 brown snakes before they thought it was safe enough to bring everyone
That's
in
nice.
from the horse stalls. So there's all these kids running around, and they're saying, put signs up, oh, probably don't go in those horse stalls, kids, because we don't know if we got all the snakes. So that was pretty full on.
Goodness.
And then they had carols, they had Santa come, and they had a Grinch who was there too, which was pretty funny. Grinch was running around, and they did all these activities for the kids. There's probably 200 or 300 Aboriginal people went to the carols, which was really exciting.
Yeah.
And the Josiah Healing Centre Church, which Isaac runs, was the main driver of the whole thing. They also had fireworks that was amazing. It was like Sydney Harbour fireworks.
Really?
No, not quite as big as that, but it was massive. It was good.
But you felt like you were in Sydney Harbour.
Yep.
That's how massive
Well,
it
no,
was.
it was. It was in between, I don't know, something and Sydney Harbour.
Another city that doesn't do fireworks as good as Sydney.
Maybe like London or New York.
I was in Paris for a New Year's Eve, and I was very disappointed
Okay.
with the. They just like we thought they would might do fireworks off the Eiffel Tower or something, and just like this large ball just came down a little bit, and that was it. And it was like, yay, Happy New Year.
Yeah, I don't think people do New Year's Eve like we do, and fireworks in Sydney. Sydney's pretty good. Have you ever been down the Opera House for fireworks on New Year's Eve, and they fall down on top of you? It's pretty cool.
Oh, do they?
Well, I've been
From the
down
Opera
at the
House?
Opera House, and it looks like they're falling on you,
Really?
but they don't. They're a long way away, but it looks like that.
I think one of the times I was actually on the north side but closer to the Harbour Bridge.
Yep.
That was pretty cool. So you could see the Opera House, and then
cool.
they always blow up the Harbour Bridge. It looks like it's gone every time.
They do. Yeah. So anyway, we had carols. That was good.
Yep, cool. And was it good to catch up with people up there?
Yeah, it was unreal. So the next day we had a baptism. So Jason Bakuya's son Penny got baptised down at the river.
Awesome.
And that was pretty cool. And I was asked to speak at that, which was good. And then we went back for a church service, and then we had another church service in the evening. So I'm just really excited to see. I don't know what our listeners and our viewers are thinking, but I think there's a lot of stuff out in the Christian world talking about church on a bigger scale, but a lot of the reality of church is on a smaller scale. Okay. And I was really heartwarmed to see a church that's on a small scale, active in its community, a church that's thriving and sustainable, but it's not even over 50 people, and it's just working. And there are families that are helping the community. I mean, they work with an organisation called Hands and Feet to distribute food to the community and clothes and things like that. So they're doing practical helps for the community. They were behind the carols. The mayor of the town is going to the church now at Isaac's church, and she's a lady who is also part of the Anglican church out there. So we could talk about that in a minute. But yeah, I was just came home convicted that I wonder if we need more discussions and considerations and thoughts about how to really invest in smaller church contexts and how to help those contexts thrive. I think that's really important.
And like kind of the grassroots level.
Yeah,
you've been thinking about that a lot.
Yeah, I have. Yeah,
that's really interesting. Before we get onto that, though, you said there were some good thoughts and ideas for the future of what's going on in northwestern New South Wales.
So the great thing there is this Isaac is a terrific networker. So he's networked with the local Christian school, Brewarrina Christian School, and through his friendship with a school in Gosford, they've got that school going. He's also working with the community. He's got on council. So there's just a lot of integrated things that are happening in the town. But the town's only about 2,500 people, and it's very isolated, and it's a long way away from anywhere. But it's a beautiful town, and it's right on the river. And the river, the Barwon River, the section where Brewarrina's on, there's some traditional fish traps, and the archaeologists have predated those fish traps to be before the pyramids. So they're very old human-made structures. And these fish traps are basically rock pools that have been made so that as fish swim upstream, they collect different sizes in different pools. They have breeding pens. They have ways of letting the fish out, ways of stopping them going. They have harvesting pens. Also, it's just really intricate farming of fish from the river. So that's been around for a while. And because those fish traps were there, traditionally Brewarrina was a place of corroboree. So the Niambar and the Wiridji people would gather at Brewarrina, thousands of people, to do corroboree. Now, after corroboree, after white settlement, they started missions in a lot of the towns. And after the missions closed down, then the Aboriginal people from all the towns started to meet together in what they call river conventions. And the river conventions was a Christian version of corroboree. So they'd travel around town to town and they'd meet to keep the Christian church alive across the whole northwest. So towns like Brewarrina, Gadooga, Lightning Ridge, Burke, Brewarrina, Gilgandra, Gilgandra, Walgett, all these towns have Christian churches that are all quite small. But once a year they do a river convention around Easter, and they do 2 weeks, they visit all the towns. And it's a fantastic way to minister to each other. And so we've been part of that for a long time as well.
And Isaac is the main driver of that, right?
Yep. So what we've been doing recently is Isaac's been saying that it'd be unreal if more Anglo people came to stuff like River Convention and the carols and stuff. So we've noticed that in talking to the Bishop of Bathurst, because the Anglican Church in Brewarrina is part of the Bathurst Diocese, Mark Calder, the Bishop of Bathurst, he put out a Facebook post last year or the year before saying that there's about 13 churches in his diocese that don't have senior ministers or any ministers running them. So we reached out and said, look, we're already friends with the crew at Brewarrina. what could we do to partner with Brewarrina Anglican Church as well as the Aboriginal church in town. And so Mark's been very generous and kind and introduced us to some of the lay readers and some of the people who are preaching in those towns. But he introduced us to a lady called Vivian from Brewarrina, who's the mayor, and she and one other friend are pretty much the only people left in that church. So on the weekend, we talked to them we'll talk to Vivian about what would it look like if we, not going every week, but if we start doing some regular services and a regular number of times a term, might that help to also add another ingredient to the town to have a bit more networking that would help the church to get even more traction in the town. So that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's always funny. You're always pushing us further and further forward as our senior pastor. How do you envision that working?
Well, I'm already going up to Brewarrina 2 or 3 times a year. So I'm thinking if I go up 4 times a year, then there might be a couple of other... we've currently got 18 preachers at Soli's, including paid and unpaid preachers. So my thought has always been, how can we then share what we've got with other churches? So we're going to basically pitch it to our preachers as anyone interested in going to Bree. And then after we work out how many people are willing to go to Bree in a year, then we could hopefully say to the town, hey, we could do this many services for you. But at the moment, there's no services at all. So that would be better than nothing. Even something at Easter and Christmas would be better than nothing. And because those services have been done in a town with Isaac's church that's running every week, we could partner with that church and see if we can get something going for Anglican people out there too. That's the idea.
And if there's any pilots listening,
I'd love someone to fly me up, 100%.
That'd save a lot of time. Anyway.
It takes me 12 hours to drive to Brewarrina. So
what would be a flight, like 3.5?
I don't know. I've thought about it. Yeah, 3.5, 4 maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, I think the flight to Alice Springs, for example, is 3.5 hours or 4 hours.
Oh, so okay. Well, it'd be closer than that.
Actually, it'd be closer than that because it's like 5 hours to Perth.
Is that really? I
Yeah.
thought it was 8 hours to Perth.
No, it's not that long.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Okay, there you go. I've never been.
I haven't been to Perth.
Never.
Oh.
Have you been to Perth?
Yes, mainly for rallying.
Rallying?
Yeah.
There you go.
Because I used to have the World Rally Championship round over there.
Yep.
I've also been there for things we used to do with my family. Anyway, that's enough about me. So it's cool to talk about that future stuff in Brewarrina.
Yeah,
but also, let's talk about future stuff for Soul Revival.
Yes.
Because you have finished the first chapter of your PhD.
Yeah. It's still a bit rough, and I'm trying to make it a bit better. Yep, first draft. So I'm hoping to do a chapter or a term next year. That's what I'm hoping to do. So this chapter is setting up the PhD pretty well. But one of the things that I'm doing is engaging. Well, the PhD is looking at the problem for churches. Why is the church struggling with cultural change?
Yeah.
So that's kind of the problem I set up. And then the research question I've got is, how can youth ministry operate as a cultural shock absorber for the church to help the church to adapt to cultural change? So how does youth and adults work together in the context of local church, which is what this whole podcast is about?
Yeah, definitely.
We look at it from different angles. But what's been really cool with this chapter is I've dug deeper into Andy Crouch's work, which we've talked about on the podcast before, and just looking at what postures the church has is a really interesting question. So I'm really interested for our viewers and listeners to be able to also think about, what posture do I have as an individual and what postures do we have as a church to cultural change? Because that can affect how successful you are to adapting to cultural change.
Is there... I don't know if I've asked you this question on the podcast. Why did you want to write the PhD? Because it's a lot of work.
It is.
as you well know.
Well, I think okay, so going back to the Dark Ages when dinosaurs still walked the earth in the late 1980s.
That's not all those things are all wrong. There were dinosaurs in the Dark Ages. You're not that old. And the 1980s was a while ago.
I'd like to think I am. Anyway, so I love the 80s. Yeah, anyway, as you can tell by my viewing habits, I might actually suggest episodes. If people don't want to watch the whole thing, there is one particular episode where Magnum has the most spectacular Hawaiian shirt that I've ever seen. I'll get that clip for you and I'll give it to Joel. I'll put it in the show notes. Anyway, coming back to the 80s. So to answer your question, I started doing a degree in political science in an arts degree at Sydney University, and then I graduated with honours. So they said, do you want to do a PhD? And I went, okay. So I started the PhD, and then I thought I'd do soul revival as a case study for my PhD to see if we could do youth ministry in a different way. And it went so big that my supervisor said, you should either write about Mother Teresa or be Mother Teresa. You can't do both. So I thought, okay, I'll be Mother Teresa. So some of our listeners might not know who she is because she died a long time
you
ago.
look a lot like her.
I try to. Short little nun who lives in India.
Yeah, that's right.
I think it was India somewhere.
Yeah,
anyway,
she was in India,
so I started that, and then I put it aside for 20 years. 30 years I put it aside. And then I've always thought to myself, I'll do it again. And then I was at a particular youth ministry conference, and a man called Darren Cronshaw approached me and said, have you ever thought of doing that as a PhD? And I went, yes. So then I joined and started it. But it's been a slow burn, but I'm all of a sudden clicked into it, and I'm writing every day now. So
really?
I want to punch it out. I really love it. It's really fun. It's like a hobby.
Okay. What appeals to you about doing it like that academic work? Because
I don't know.
I don't know if I want to do that.
It's a good question. I don't know. It's really cool. It's like painting.
Is it?
It is.
Like
it's very meditative.
Being creative.
Yeah, it's creative. It's like, do I put this colour on that rock, or do I put that colour on that wave? Do I put a tree there, or do I put a bush there? It's a bit like that. It's very creative. So,
well, that's fascinating.
Yeah, I really like writing. I like writing because I like, do I go down that rabbit hole or that rabbit hole? Problem is that I have too many ideas. So my supervisors are trying to say, squash it down. Yeah. So,
and you've also said to me that there is a lot to come out. You think there's a lot to come out?
I think so for next year. Yeah, I think it's a lot of practical stuff.
Do you want to give us a sneak
That's the other reason why I'm doing it. So I think the sneak peek is, I think actually, it's one thing to say that young people help the church to adapt to cultural change, but how do they do it? What's the mechanism? What helps churches to do it? And when do churches miss out on that mechanism? Also, what happens if you don't have any young people in your church, or if you don't have many young people in your church? How do you start from nothing and go from scratch? So at Soli's, we've gone from scratch twice. So we started with 4 kids in 91, and then that did grow. God bless that. And then in 2010, we started with 30 people, but we only had 1 kid in our youth group, and then we started with 1 kid. So I think there's some stuff in there. I'm trying to investigate what's that. Now, numbers is not the only healthy metric of a church. However, I think that if we're as a church discipling and on mission, then we want to see more people come into the kingdom. If God brings them into the kingdom, that'd be really cool. So I think we've got to do the best we can to partner with the Lord in that. Yeah.
What do you think gets in the way, or stops young people being that shock absorber, or actually allows the young people
I
to
think
be
that's a
shock
good
absorber?
question. I think it starts with the adults and their posture towards culture. So if the adults are, I'm old, I like things the way I like it, and I don't want to hear new ideas,
isn't that the
that's not going to go
never-ending
anywhere.
story of culture?
It is. It's pretty ubiquitous, not just within the church, but within a lot of social frameworks. A lot of cultures, people like me at my age, at 55, go, well, I've earned my straps. I had to spend years and years and years being told what to do, but now I'm in charge, and now it's my turn. There's a bit of that as you get older. Whereas I don't want to feel like that. I actually want to say, how could I be a servant and a shepherd to younger people and help raise them up? So how do I listen to their ideas and actually strengthen them, rather than tell them to be like me and expect them to copy me without any authority just to do that? So I think it starts with the adults. So for example, I'm in a church with, say I'm in a church with majority of retirees. How could I possibly get the shock absorber working? Well, one thing could be for the church to go, is there another local church around here that we could partner with to work with them as well? And what would that look like? I don't know. But could we offer to help another church with something, and also ask that other church to become friends? And once we became friends, is there anything we could do together? And I don't know, see where it goes. So I really believe in iterative design, and just because in the past things haven't worked doesn't mean that has to happen in the future. So networking is one option. Another option is, there's a local school, maybe we could offer some after school care. Let's do safe ministry training. Let's do something on a Friday afternoon for kids in primary school and start there. That's another way of getting to have proximity with younger people, for example. So there's plenty. The other thing too, I reckon, is in any church there are younger and older people, and the question is, no matter how old you are, the youngest people might be in their 40s, but are the people in their 70s listening to the people in their 40s? And are the people in their 40s wanting to engage in relationship? So I've been super inspired by the concept of friendship in the church, and part of my PhD for next year and the podcast for next year is exploring an ecclesiology of friendship and a theology of friendship. And does that give us any extra help too? Because in our culture, we often think that you have to be friends with people who are the same age as you, but you can be friends with older people and you can be friends with younger people. That actually opens up a whole horizon of possibilities for ministry when you start thinking like that.
Yeah. And again, it's like you said, the Shokazoba is the young people are at the coalface of cultural change, and they bring that into the church. But then if you've got even the retirees that you're talking about earlier, they've got all the biblical wisdom and experience of being a Christian for so long.
Yeah, 100%.
There's a lot in that, as we've learned over many years.
So, for example, older people might like traditional services. That's cool. Keep doing a traditional service. But maybe start a Saturday night service as well and invite your family to come to it and have a barbecue. Food is a really good thing to start doing. There's TV shows now like Old Person's Home for 4-year-olds or Old Person's Home for teenagers. So our broader culture is also exploring intergenerational relationships. So what can we do in that space? Now, the other thing in the podcast for next year that we're going to explore is we've talked a lot about the fact that there's a homogeneous unit principle church where people break their church services into age groups, and different age groups go to different things. But there's also the intergenerational church. And I think, as I've been researching this term, I think Soul Revival is what I would like to call a moderate intergenerational church. So it does have some age-specific things in it as well as...
talked about that before,
intergenerational, So I think there's a lot more to explore in what is a moderate intergenerational church. So that would be a really interesting thing to hear
and
about.
That's the kind of maybe a sliding scale that you're perhaps talking about, and Tim's talked about before, is the intergenerational sometimes means children and youth are part of everything and everything that we do. But you're saying moderate because we kind of we create spaces for them as well as being intergenerational.
Well, there's a really interesting paradigm within intergenerational ministry, which is looking at the way the intergenerational aspect works. And what's interesting is, do you have a bottom-up or a top-down approach to young people? Is it a top-down, the older people are teaching the young people? Or is the bottom-up, hey, no, we really need the young people to lead us in the integrated process of that? Well, I think Soul Revival has a bit of both. Because the other thing is, there's a thinker called Kenda Creasy-Dean, and she has said that where there is a context where young people are segregated from the rest of the church, which is definitely something that we don't try and segregate our young people from the rest of the church. But she says when they are worshipping separate to the church at some stages, that's where they come up with experiments. So my fear is, number one, in the homogeneous unit principle church, where are the spaces to bring young people together with old people? And in the intergenerational space, where are the places where young people are left alone to come up with new ideas? So I'm really excited about trying to have a top-down and a bottom-up approach.
And that's why you're saying moderate's in between.
Moderate intergenerational.
That's kind of funny because in a lot of things we do as a church, we don't think we hold the middle line a lot of the time, but in that sense that we're maybe,
I think we do. Yeah, I think we do. Often, I'm a bit of a centrist generally. I like to think I am anyway. But often I think the extremes miss something. They lose something or they get baggage sometimes when it's not necessary. So I don't like throwing out the baby with the bathwater. So if young people are with adults all the time, sounds good, but where do they get to do crazy stuff and fun stuff and new stuff? Because it could get squashed by the oldies too quickly. So they experiment with something, but then can have a conversation about that with the older people. That's what we need to build in the church. And I think the theology of friendship is going to help us to integrate that, because you talk to your friends about fun stuff.
Right. Yeah, talk more about that theology of friendship, though. What are you thinking around that so far?
Okay. Well, I think we need another podcast on it. But I think it's a good question, because people might have heard of Dietrich Bonhoeffer. He's quite famous as a German theologian from the Second World War. And there's a guy called Andrew Root who's written a book called Bonhoeffer, the Youth Minister, or something like that. And in that book, he talks about Bonhoeffer's view that community should be incarnational, in that the community should be present in the broader community. And books like Andrew Root's focus on Bonhoeffer's theology of family and how we are a family. But it's really interesting that later in life, Bonhoeffer also looked at church as a friendship group. And so when he looked at that, he was exploring how the category of friendship might help us to understand what God has made us to be as the church as well. And so the thing that I find exciting about that is, in Australia, sometimes the category of family gives people an excuse to be pleasant strangers to each other, because your family could live all the way across the country or even the world these days.
See each other at Christmas, for example.
Christmas, let's get together. Do our young people hear that the local church is family and think, cool, I don't actually have to be in close relationship with everyone in the church?
Like kind of
just wondering.
Like identify that as the same thing.
Yeah. So I'm thinking, if you say that we're all friends, that's kind of maybe helpful, because people go, oh, friends have the same mission. Friends are seeking to be close and have deeper relationships. Now, people push back and say, but I can't have friends with the whole church. That's too hard. But what I'm investigating with Bonhoeffer is he has 3 categories of friendship. He has personal friendship. He has, now I can't remember the terms off the top of my head. I'll have to go back and look at them, but I'll fix it for the next podcast. I'll find out. But it's personal friendship. Then I think it's group friendship. Mm-hmm. And then I think it's the whole church friendship.
Gee, that's helpful, hey?
It's really helpful, because what he then does is he says, you don't have to be best friends with everyone in the church, but you don't have to be only friends with one person or a small group of people, because a lot of people go to church and look for their friends. So going to church for a lot of people is like going to the movies. When you go to the movies, you don't think that you have a relationship with everybody else in the room. You're there with your friends in the midst of that big group. But if you take on Bonhoeffer's categories, you can have a closer relationship with a few people, and you can have a best friend even. But that doesn't mean you can't be friends at a lesser degree, but still deeply with a whole lot of other people too. So that's the space I want to explore next year. Like, what does it look like to have friendships in that sort of gradated fashion? Now, we've talked about this before in the podcast too, but Jesus is an example of this. So Jesus had James and Peter and John as his 3 best mates.
Yep.
But then he had his 12. And then around the 12, he had 72. And around the 72, we think he had about 120 disciples in total.
Right.
Near the time of his death. Now, the crowds would come too, so that was a number that would breathe in and breathe out. But yeah, you've got this sense that because Jesus is best friends with John and James and Peter, doesn't stop him being incredibly close with 12, and with 72, he's friends with them too, and then he's friends with the rest of the group. So I'm really interested in unpicking that together as a church in Sydney, because friendship might help us to think of a category that's actually very servant-hearted, and that's what Bonhoeffer argues for. He says that we should be thinking that discipleship is costly, not easy, but in a world where a lot of people are consuming church as individuals, and for example, like people go to church and look to see if the church is very welcoming. They'll test the church. And if they don't get spoken to, they'll say, oh, the church isn't very friendly. But I've often thought about that, and I thought, yeah, I kind of get that to a degree. But when you go to a local soccer club, if you just walk into a soccer club and you just walk around, no one's going to talk to you. If you want to talk to someone, you go and talk to them. And then if you leave a church and then sit back and wait to see if anybody notices, well, if you've made the decision to leave the church, you've kind of left the church. And if you haven't told anybody you've left, you might be thinking, if it's a good church, they'll notice me and they'll ring me up. It's kind of true, but then there's also a responsibility on the people who leave to say, leave well too. So I think there's something there that I'm interested in exploring.
I think that's definitely true. What it makes me start thinking about is that I wonder if you've had many conversations over the years about this kind of friendship idea. And some people have maybe pushed back on you,
yes,
saying that
very true.
I only want my close group of friends.
Yeah, I just
and
want a
that's
few
it.
friends. Yep.
That's what I'm really interested in, because that's something that I've perhaps grappled with as well. Is
Right.
that I think I love being part of Soul Revival, and I think doing things as friends is really, really important.
Yeah.
I've learned that over many years. But sometimes, even personally, I'm like, oh, but I do like having close friends too.
Yeah.
And probably grappling with that. So I think that's why it's really cool that you're looking into that.
I think the thing is, if you've got an open friendship group and you're open to be friends with other people and love other people, I've got to think this through, but I don't really like the 1990s TV show Friends, view of Friends, because their view of Friends was we have a closed group and no one could get in. And part of the fun of the show was when other people tried to break into the friendship group, they weren't allowed to. It was kind of a bit quirky and funny. But I think deep down everyone's like, yeah, that's kind of what I'm like. I've got this small group of friends. I don't want anyone else to come. So how do we grow the church if we've got a small group of friends that no one else can come? So some of the problem might be demographic. We need to have more demographics in our particular local church. But another might be, how friendly are we? Are we friendly to people, or do we treat new people? Do we treat new people as a potential new friend, or do we treat them as a pleasant stranger and just be polite to them? Because I think that people are lonely and looking for relationships, and we need to point them to Jesus. And as we express our relationship with Jesus, we can see them through the lens of Christ. That's what Bonhoeffer says. So see, friendship isn't about you and I have something in common. You and I are looking at each other through the lens of Christ.
Jesus is what
and we have compassion with each other, for each other. And so that's the basis of our friendship, sort of.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah. I was sharing on the podcast last week, I've just started a biography on Bonhoeffer.
Oh, okay.
And he decided he was going to be a theologian at the age of 12.
Wow.
He's just like, this is what I'm doing. But he actually decided earlier, but that's when he announced it to his family.
Super smart guy.
And that's what seems to be the case from what I'm reading. I'm only up to the part where he's gone to university.
Yeah.
Berlin University, because that's where he decided to study theology. There were some well-renowned theologians there. And they were all like, there were people basically at the university battling to try and get him to do their his doctorate with them. That's how clever he was.
Yeah, when I read his doctorate, I was like, wow, this is crazy. Such a great work. He was so young. He's very brave, man. But yeah, so that's kind of fun. I think it's exciting, because I think, coming back to Andy Crouch, he says that, well, in his opinion, he thinks the most creative response of the church to cultural change is to be creative, so that we contribute to culture, not just either condemn it or critique it or consume it or copy it, but we actually create culture. So what does it look like to have culturally creative churches? What does that look like? What are some of the metrics for that? What are some of the productions of that? And the thing about friendship that I'm interested in is, what sort of discipleship paradigm is that? Like, how does being committed to someone low-key, long-term, relationally for a long term, how does that affect how we disciple each other? And how do we help young people to read the Bible for themselves? So,
and that plays into something you've talked about before, about there's different ways that people have been discipled, and that plays out across the church.
Yeah,
for example.
I think so. Yeah,
and it's something that we probably, like you said, we need to keep talking about.
I think so. Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, why don't we leave it there for this podcast?
Cool. Yep, that was fun.
Thank you for being on.
I've missed being here.
We've missed you too. So, but
check out Magnum PI.
Oh yeah,
even a clip on YouTube. See what you think.
All right, and Slow Horses.
Slow Horses
as well. Next Wednesday, every Wednesday. The Shock Absorber comes out on a Wednesday. So if you listen to the Shock Absorber in the morning,
and
you
then
watch
Slow Horses at night.
At the end of the day,
you might even want to watch Tom Baker, Doctor Who. Some of those episodes are terrifying, particularly when he goes on some spaceship with massive spiders. Unreal.
No
I can never work out why the Daleks are so terrifying, though, because they can't climb stairs.
Okay.
Exterminate.
I have so little knowledge of Doctor Who that I can't answer that for you. Sorry.
No, there you go.
Thank you for being on.
See ya. One way.
Hang on. I've got to do the outro bit.
Demarcation dispute.
Thank you, everyone, for listening or watching. You can email me at joel@shockabsorber.com.au if you want to keep being part of the conversation, or chuck a comment in our YouTube channel or under one of the videos. I will definitely see it. Shout out to Michael Greaves, one of our long-standing members of Soul Revival Church, who continues to comment on there. So thank you, mate. We appreciate you. But as I said, thank you, everyone listening. Thank you to Stu and Now we're finished with the one way.
One way?
Yeah,
One way.
One way.